Tonight, vaccinate or bust. Protests across the country as the White House doubles down on a mandate requiring companies with 100 or more workers to make sure their employees get the vaccine.
This is an authority that we believe the Department of Labor has.
And the Supreme Court hears a major religious liberty case involving a death row inmate and a pastor. And the threat from China.
I don't know if it's quite a Sputnik moment, but I think it's very close to that.
The Chinese military's hypersonic missile capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. Plus, splashdown. The latest SpaceX crew returns to Earth. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Lawsuits flooding in over vaccine requirements. Good evening, I'm Jenna Browder.
I'm John Jessup. Welcome to Faith Nation. The fight for freedom of choice over the COVID vaccine is taking shape in the courts after Republicans forced the government to hit the pause button on the Labor Department's employer mandate.
At least 27 states have sued the Biden administration over the mandate, and now several businesses and advocacy groups are filing suit, arguing the administration is overstepping its power. CBN's Brody Carter has our top story.
Even after a U.S. appeals court temporarily blocked the vaccine mandate, the Biden administration is pushing businesses to proceed. More than half of the states, several businesses, and vocal church leaders are saying no.
The issue here is a mandate that threatens to turn a religious institution into an arm, a coercive arm of the state.
Dr. Albert Mohler, president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, is fully vaccinated, and he encourages his students to get the shot. Mohler adds, however, the federal mandate tramples religious freedoms, which is why he's suing the Biden administration.
There is not an exemption for religious employers. That's why we have filed this suit. We're looking at issues in which the nation is divided, and we shouldn't be surprised that people of Christian conviction are divided. There's our basic unity in Christ, and so we're leaning into that. But this is out of respect for that difference of conviction. And that's the very reason we've done this.
Dr. Mohler joins a growing nationwide list suing the government. Biden wants all federal appellate cases consolidated by next week. Attorneys at Alliance Defending Freedom say it's possible the U.S. Supreme Court could step in.
We think this is a gross violation of the ministerial exemption of church autonomy, not to mention religious freedom under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and the Free Exercise Clause.
Even after the Fifth Circuit Court temporarily halted the mandate, the White House Monday basically advised employers to ignore it.
The administration clearly has the authority to protect workers, and actions announced by the president are designed to save lives and stop the spread of COVID-19. And as DOJ said, they will be defending these lawsuits.
While the courts quietly deal with legal battles, the louder political impact of vaccine mandates and masks remains. Regardless where Christians stand on the issues, Dr. Mohler says it's vital to be an example.
This is our responsibility 24/7. And Christians, some sooner, some later, are being awakened to the issues we now face. In an increasingly secularizing society, we're going to have to be ever more vocal, ever more articulate, respectfully engaged by Christian conviction. That's our calling.
New lawsuits against the mandate are coming in daily, if not hourly. The most recent filed on behalf of U.S. Navy SEALs applying for religious exemptions that the Pentagon is refusing to grant. I'm Brody Carter, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Brody. Well, from COVID-19 mandates to First Amendment rights for death row inmates, the Supreme Court took up that issue today. The question at hand, should pastors be allowed to be present, pray out loud, and minister with the laying on of hands in the final moments before a death row inmate is executed? In Ramirez versus Collier, a Texas inmate is calling on the court to allow religious accommodations for his upcoming execution. Currently, the man's pastor is allowed to attend, but citing security risks, a Texas lower court ruled he can't talk to or touch prisoner John Ramirez as he's set to die. Ramirez's lawyer argued against any potential security threat from clergy.
I think you're saying, the risk isn't that much. But how do we analyze that?
There are substantial laws in the books in every state criminalizing interference with a law enforcement officer in the disposition of his duties. There is not a single example in history where any spiritual advisor, and the state allowed these, as a matter of course, has ever interrupted a proceeding.
In a highly criticized 2019 case, the High Court ruled a Muslim death row inmate couldn't have an imam present during his execution. But a few months later, the court reversed course, prohibiting Texas from killing a Buddhist prisoner without his spiritual advisor present. The case is expected to set a precedent on prisoners' First Amendment rights to carry out their religious beliefs without government interference. And joining us now, Heather Rice-Minus, Senior Vice President of Advocacy and Church Mobilization at Prison Fellowship. Heather, welcome. It's great to have you. So fundamentally, how important is that death row inmates have access to a pastor or priest as they face, their final moments of life? And is this faith access a right under the First Amendment?
Yes, thank you for having me. As the largest Christian nonprofit providing programming to people in prisons, we know that there is such an opportunity for people to grab hold of faith and transform their lives inside of prisons. And there are many sacred rituals and moments. I think one of the highest ones is definitely the passing on of life. And so we want to see that people do have that opportunity to have those who are spiritually guiding them and supporting them be present in that final moment.
Heather, is there any way the current policy preventing a pastor from being present during an execution can potentially prevent prison ministries like yours from giving comfort to other inmates?
I think that the issue here is whether or not there's enough of a security risk, right, for this minister to be present. And Prison Fellowship was involved, for example, in another religious liberty case involving a Muslim prisoner, Holt v. Hobbs, and the court came down unanimously that in that case that the prisoner should be allowed the religious accommodation to move forward, and that there wasn't enough of security risk at present there. And so those are the questions that we're always wrestling with in terms of access. But for us, we have a robust programming across the country and access in this particular state where this is taking place. And we want to make sure that access remains viable to be able to go in and to share the good word and the gospel and the hope of the gospel. And we want that to be available for every prisoner to practice their religion and to be able to have access to someone who can support them in these times.
Given the extreme circumstances of any execution, do you believe that policy should be less restrictive for pastors and people of faith?
Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, just given the extreme circumstances of an execution, do you think that the rules, the policies, should be less restrictive for pastors or other, leaders of different religions?
I do think that there's something, certainly there's religious moments that are sacred, right? Whether that's the ability to take communion or baptism in the Christian faith. And certainly at the extreme point in life when someone's about to lose their life and they're leaning on and realizing that they're coming to their end time, I do think that there should be increased scrutiny on how we're going about making sure that person has an accommodation so that they have that spiritual guidance available to them.
All right. Heather Rice-Minus with Prison Fellowship. It's great to have you with us this evening. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Well, an annual review of military security developments in China has the Pentagon's top brass warning about a major power shift that could threaten U.S. national security.
China's military, the People's Liberation Party, is advancing toward its goal of being able to compete with the U.S. military much faster than originally predicted. The CBN national security correspondent Caitlin Burke took a look at the 2021 China Military Power Report and joins us now from the Pentagon. Caitlin, what are defense officials zeroing in on here?
Well, Jenna, nuclear advancements are getting the most attention. According to this year's report, China will have at least 1,000 nuclear warheads by 2030, a much more aggressive pace than predicted in last year's report. Even so, some experts believe China's true arsenal is actually much bigger.
Beijing has not been willing to talk to the U.S. As we talked, for instance, to the Soviet Union during the Cold War. China is just refused to have any discussions about arsenal size, arms control, all the rest of it. So we have to assume the worst. And I think that we should assume that China has far more than 1,000 now.
According to this year's report, estimates about the number of ballistic missiles in China's arsenal are also up. And in August, Beijing is believed to have started testing a hypersonic weapon, something Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, called very close to being a Sputnik moment, referring to the 1957 Soviet satellite launch, which beat the U.S. to outer space.
We have a case here of a country that is becoming extraordinarily powerful, that wants to revise the international order to their advantage. That's going to be a real challenge over the coming years, in next 10, 20 years. That's going to be really significant.
While many of these military advancements have already been developed by the U.S., it's the speed in which China is accomplishing them that's most concerning.
We're witnessing one of the largest shifts in global geostrategic power that the world has witnessed.
Beijing is using its arsenal to intimidate others. In July, they threatened to incinerate Japanese cities. Soon after that, they threatened to go after Australia with nukes. They have periodically and in an unprovoked fashion threatened the United States.
China state media recently warned that a military showdown with the U.S. will come if it attempts to block China's, quote, reunification with Taiwan. These satellite images show a mock-up of a U.S. warship in the Chinese desert, believed to have been built as a training target. China expert Gordon Chang believes not only is a takeover of Taiwan imminent, the communist power won't stop there.
China is preparing to take over Taiwan, but it's also preparing to take over India, to take over Japan, to take over the world. Xi Jinping has been using themes from in China's imperial past, where Chinese emperors believed that they had not only the mandate of heaven to rule Tianxia, or all under heaven, but that heaven compelled them to do so.
Despite China's rapid military buildup, Chang says it's not too late for the U.S. to intervene. He's concerned, however, that while the military strength exists, America's leaders have not had the political will. John?
Caitlin, any specific scenario experts believe might be the catalyst that causes a real military conflict with China?
Well, U.S. support of Taiwan remaining autonomous is definitely getting the headlines right now, but it isn't the only potential catalyst. One thing Chang tells me isn't talked about enough would be an accident that leads to an incident. China is engaged in dangerous air and sea maneuvers where things could go wrong. And with tensions as they are right now, General Milley recently said that the U.S., Russia, China, and our allies are going to have to be very careful and conscious of how we deal with each other moving forward. John?
Careful and watchful indeed. CBN's Caitlin Burke. Thank you so much, Caitlin.
And coming up, a 14-day challenge for dads. How it's helping men become strong, influential fathers.
Welcome back. Promise Keepers, Pastor Tony Evans, and the faith-based scouting group Trail Life USA are teaming up for a 2-week challenge for dads. The Fatherhood Summit begins tomorrow with a 1-hour live event streamed both on Facebook and YouTube, kicking off 14 days of encouragement and practical application, all while building community by connecting dads through discussion. Their goal is to help men be strong, influential fathers to their own children and to those who don't have a dad in their lives. Well, here with us now is Ken Harrison, Chairman and CEO of Promise Keepers. Ken, welcome back to Faith Nation. First off, how did this idea come about? And Ken, what's your hope for dads participating in the summit?
Well, we found that so many dads don't really know how to be dads, and they've asked us for help because the tradition of Christianity in America has been fathers teaching their sons how to be fathers. But, in these last couple of generations, we've seen a real interruption in that. And so we have so many dads like, how do I communicate with my kids, especially with massively changing culture so fast we can barely keep up with it? What do I say if my child says this or that? And so we take on some really tough issues to really help dads know what to do, what to say, and how to behave.
Yeah, there are certainly a host of Hot topic issues today. Promise Keepers encourages men to be Christ-like leaders and for their church and for their community. What does that look like in a father?
Well, I always tell men, if you want to know what a man is, just look at Jesus. And, we've seen masculinity get attacked from one side, but I also think sometimes it gets attacked on the other, meaning we have made Jesus into this sort of hippie-like creature that gets walked on by people, and we forget that he's a king who laid down his life for others. And we also forget he was extremely confrontational with hypocrisy, religious oppression. So, when Jesus is calling you a brood of vipers or a disciple of hell, you've kind of gotten on the wrong way. So I want to teach men, you need to be gracious, but you also need to be strong. You need to stand up for your children. Your kids need to see you as a hero. Your wife needs to see you as someone that would do whatever it takes to defend her. So if you want to know what it takes to be a man or a father, just look at Christ.
Yeah, it's very true. We often try to paint Jesus in one dimension, and he's definitely more than one-dimensional. Ken, in these very busy and often stressful times, what advice would you offer to fathers about balancing work and their other responsibilities against the priority of their kids?
That's a good question. John Wooden said, next to love, balance is the most important thing. And I think if we start to look at what the world wants us to be, we will end up frustrated because we'll end up not spending enough time with our kids, not spending enough time with our wives, and then not spending enough time at work, making enough money. And you feel like you're in this spiral. We have an epidemic of the friendless American male right now because men are pressured from all sides all the time. And the last thing they have time for is friends or Bible study or being involved in church. And I know a lot of guys know exactly what I'm talking about. We have to keep our eyes on Jesus. We have to live our life for an audience of one. Everything we do balances out as, when I stand before the judgment seat of Christ, 2 Corinthians 5:10, I want to hear him say, well done, my good and faithful servant, not you wicked, lazy slave, right? If we keep our eyes on that, that will help us to make sure that everything stays at balance because we have our priorities right.
Yeah, that's a good word. All right, Ken Harrison, Chairman and CEO of Promise Keepers, thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. When we come back, the State Department releases its updated blacklist for violations of religious freedom. More on that when Faith Nation returns.
The State Department is working on a list that has the potential to deter religious persecution in countries around the world.
That's right. It is a compilation of places the United States is monitoring for abuses against Christians and other people of faith. CBN's Jennifer Wishon explains why no country wants to land on it.
Which countries will land on the list of top offenders, and what does that mean for them? The State Department is expected to make a decision before Thanksgiving. For more on this, we turn to Anurima Bhargava, who is a commissioner on the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom, also known as USCIRF. Commissioner Bhargava, there are 4 countries that USCIRF recommends the State Department put on the countries of particular concern list, which is a list of top offenders. These are 4 countries that have not, at least in recent memory, been on this list. Tell us about those.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jennifer. We have a laser-like focus on religious freedom. So there are 4 countries that we recommended to the State Department be designated countries of particular concern because of systematic, ongoing, and egregious violations of religious freedom. And those 4 countries are Russia, India, Syria, and Vietnam. And we have designated a number of those as CPCs for many years, India and Syria in the last few years. And it's because we see in those countries that religious freedom conditions are trending in a really negative direction. And there are concerns about the ability of many religious communities to be safe, to be able to practice their religion, and to be able to do so without violence that is either perpetrated by the government or is sanctioned or allowed to happen by the government.
I know that there are all types of diplomatic considerations that are wrapped up in these considerations by the State Department, but give us a sense for countries that are on the CPC list, the list of top offenders, what are some of the ramifications?
There are a whole host of different ramifications. There could be sanctions of officials who are engaged in the kind of religious persecution and violence or allowing for it that we've identified. It's one of the things that we recommend every year. There are ways in which there can be other economic security, other kinds of ways in which we may engage differently as the United States.
It's almost like an international shaming, if you will. I know countries really don't want to be on this list. They don't like that they're kind of put out there and the world can see this. There's a light shining on these violations.
Sure, and it's important that we continue to do this at a time where there's so much disinformation. It's hard to figure out what's happening on the ground in many different countries. It's important for us to shine that kind of light, to give voice to those who are vulnerable.
I think it's also interesting to point out that along with state actors, USCIRF is also keeping an eye on non-state actors, with groups that you call entities of particular concern. These are the groups that are often making headlines in the world, negative headlines. Tell us about that.
Sure. So there are non-state actors that we are all very familiar with, actors like the Taliban, actors like Boko Haram. Those are entities of particular concern, which are having, really systematic, ongoing, and egregious impacts on religious freedom of so many communities that are really attacking many of those who are the most vulnerable.
As always, Commissioner Bargrava, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Really appreciate being here.
Thank you, ladies. And still ahead, SpaceX makes a splash. The Dragon capsule successfully returns 4 astronauts from the International Space Station. To see the water landing next.
And finally tonight, 4 astronauts from NASA's Crew 2 are back here on Earth safe and sound after returning Monday, marking a successful end to the 6-month space station mission.
After a delayed return, the SpaceX capsule splashed down in the Gulf of Mexico. On board, NASA astronauts Shane Kimbrough and Megan MacArthur, along with their cohorts from France and Japan. The capsule parachuted into the Florida Gulf in complete darkness. The astronauts' homecoming paved the way for SpaceX to launch their 4 replacements, get this, as early as Wednesday night, tomorrow night.
Well, I'm not sure.
I guess that means you can sign up to go. They're just taking people one after the next.
We'll sign you up, Jenna. Thanks for watching Faith Nation.
Have a great night.